Hollywood media proclaims that the Walt Disney Company is still the king of the box office with a 37% market share so far, year-to-date 2023. So everything is just fine.
Remain calm. All is well.
Yeah, or is there a bigger problem here? And namely, that's what we're going to cover here in this video, because the production budgets for film for the Walt Disney Company are absolutely, unequivocally out of control. Here we go. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. A few days ago, I released a video on Indiana Jones box office compared to The Sound of Freedom, and how The Sound of Freedom showed up and surprised everybody on 4th of July, taking the top spot from Indy. You can see it right there, the first one in the list. And during that video, I made a remark about how Hollywood trades love to spin the fact that Disney is sitting atop the box office market share. But this article, like so many others, points out the fact that, well, Disney has the biggest market share in the theaters right now domestically. Gosh darn it, that's just wonderful. Yeah, it does not matter one single bit if you're losing hundreds of millions of dollars. 37% market share sounds great. Hell, they could finish the year with 50 or 60% market share. It doesn't matter to me. Did you actually turn a profit, or did you lose $500 million or more? And at this point, it's erring to the side of more. Much, much more. Unless, of course, as the article stipulates, that the Haunted Mansion is going to be a breakout success. But don't worry, folks. The Marvels comes later this year. Ugh. And gosh darn it, wouldn't you know it, just about 3 hours later, this happened. Man, can I predict these people or what? This from Deadline magazine. Disney, despite Indiana Jones and Elemental misfires, it's still leading the 2023 global box office with $3.4 billion. Of course, that is gross retail revenue, not what goes back to Disney. That's exactly what we're going to break down today, and I'm going to show you how bad some of these budgets have gotten over time, because there's probably a lot of things you may have missed, never seen, or forgotten. We can knock Disney all we want over less than stellar post-COVID results on Marvel and Pixar and now Lucasfilm titles. But the fact of the matter is the brands are still delivering, making the theatrical motion picture studio the continued box office leader with $3.4 billion worldwide for the period of January 1st through July 2nd. That breaks out to $1.35 billion domestic and $2.05 billion abroad. And this is off of 7 theatrical releases so far in 2023. Exhibitors can continue to give thanks that the former practitioner of theatrical day and date on streaming is no longer doing so, and committed to a theatrical window, thus seeing the financial vibrancy of a downstream model post-pandemic. The riches of that trigger concession sales for theater owners and other exhibition ancillary businesses and beyond. And that part is true. Certainly the theaters are the biggest beneficiaries of these Disney tentpoles coming out, even if they don't return a profit to Disney, which we've covered in a previous video. This is going to be a follow-up to that. So the theaters are relatively happy, although they certainly wish the ticket sales for some of these films, like Indiana Jones, would be a lot better than they are. Now, you'll see in the next few paragraphs that the article goes on to basically compare Disney to other studios like Paramount, like Universal, like Sony, saying how much bigger Disney is at the box office at the total receipts this year so far. Of course, that doesn't really take into account the fact that everything that the Walt Disney Company puts out is a tentpole, comes with a $200+ million price tag, and most of the other pictures from these other studios come with much smaller price tags with the occasional tentpole. So we'll break down the reality of those numbers in just a minute, but let's talk about a recent article that came out to give you an idea of why the global box office receipts in and of themselves just simply do not matter. Forbes, as you may recall from coverage here on Valiant Renegade, has been doing yeoman's work tracking down a lot of these United Kingdom companies, these production entities that places like the Walt Disney Studios set up in order to film a given project. And that's standard common practice out there because it affords them the ability to get a hold of very lucrative UK film tax credits. But it also exposes Disney to a bit of public scrutiny they'd probably rather not anyone know about. Disney tax returns from the UK reveal that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, or Doctor Strange 2, cost $100 million more than its estimated budget. And that stated production budget, as a reminder, is right here. $200 million is what came out last year when this movie dropped. But of course, it wasn't. What we found out recently is that the actual spend that Disney made to complete this film was about $300 million. And we knew when that movie came out that it was more expensive than what was being stated, simply because, as you may recall, this movie underwent 6 solid weeks of massive reshoots. That was just a few months before the movie came out, and of course, after those reshoots, you would have had massive post-production VFX, CGI that would have had to have been redone as well to suit the new footage that was shot. So we knew right off the bat there was no way that that movie came in on budget at $200 million, and I even speculated over a year ago that this movie probably came in $250 or more. Well, now we've got the numbers, and it's $300. Yeah, but don't worry, they fired Victoria Alonso. That solved everything. And as you might recall, everybody said that Doctor Strange was a big success for Disney. Well, in a sense. It was fortunate to follow up right behind Spider-Man No Way Home from Sony, but in this case, when you talk about $300 million in production and another $150 or so in marketing still, you're at $450 million roughly in all-in costs for Disney on this film. Worldwide box office was at $950 million. If we use our typical calculator here, that means that the Walt Disney Company certainly still profited on this film, but now that profit has shrunk to near nothing. I think they probably walked away with around $25 million or so in profit on this film after they paid out all their expenses. And of course, that doesn't include things like paying back in residuals. So yes, it's true. You can have a movie that approaches $1 billion in retail sales and still not make much of a profit. And that's due largely to the fact that the Walt Disney Company seems to have no control over its studio production management or any type of cost controls on these budgets. Now, in 2019 and before, Disney may have been able to get away with that to one degree or another, and that was because everything at the MCU, for example, was firing on all cylinders. Retail sales, not only at the box office, but massive post-theatrical contracts with places like Netflix that were worth billions of dollars over time for all those movies to go to. Again, all of that's off the table. Merchandise sales in 2023 for Marvel characters, nowhere near what they were in 2019 because the power of the brand has been so diminished. And these production budget overruns, massive production budget overruns, are nothing terribly new to Disney, or at least to Marvel, but it's just that they're affecting them much more today than they did previously because of the worsened box office. In case you've forgotten, this is from 2015. Yes, 8 years ago now. Disney reveals that Guardians of the Galaxy, the first Guardians of the Galaxy, was over budget at $232 million. This was a movie that still to this day on the numbers shows an estimated production budget of $170. Now again, that's probably what Disney originally intended to spend, but they went about $60 million over that in 2015. So if Disney spent $230+ million in 2015 for the first Guardians movie, does anybody think that Disney actually came in on budget with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 at $250 million? I have a feeling that Forbes is going to find a very different picture when the tax returns for that production entity finally release in the UK sometime next year. And the same can be said about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which also had a rather significant amount of reshoots, although, so far as we know, not quite as extensive as Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So again, I don't expect that picture to actually come in at the stated budget once those financial documents are made available next year. But hey, Valiant, what about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny? We already know this. The budget's out, $300+ million. Surely that's going to be accurate. Well, it may be or it may not. We don't know everything yet because, of course, there were expenses after January 1st of this year attributed to the production of that film due to reshoots once again. So it may actually be a bit higher. But why then did we get a $300 million figure on this film before it came out versus other films where we've gotten much lower figures like 200? Well, I think that has a lot to do with the fact that this film was delayed an entire year. For those that may not recall, this film was supposed to be released in the summer of 22. a full year ago before it was delayed. And because of that delay, it created a window of opportunity. That is to say that by the time the movie came out, unlike Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, unlike Guardians 3, unlike Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, the tax returns for this movie actually came out before the movie did. And that gave us a window into what it cost versus Disney's stated production budget. So in other words, had that not happened, had the delay not occurred, had this movie actually come out last year and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny released in July of 22, then we might have seen a budget that said 200 million or maybe 250, as opposed to the 300 plus approaching 350, in my opinion, that it actually is. Well, let's take a look at what that $3.4 billion has actually brought in. Now, I have projected out final runs in this case for Little Mermaid, Elemental, Indiana Jones 5, and I'm thinking they're probably going to be right about there. If anything, I may be a little bit generous with Indiana Jones 5, but there you go, 1.176 billion. Let's call it 1.18 billion. Just to be fair. The problem, of course, is what the Walt Disney Company actually spent. And here's the film-by-film breakdown, beginning with Ant-Man and the Wasp, Guardians, The Little Mermaid, Elemental, Indiana Jones 5. This is where we are. Disney spent a total of $1.88 billion to produce and market these films. That's not even adding in any likely extra costs with movies like Guardians 3 and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, who, as we just discussed, probably exceeded their stated production budgets by a fair margin. So what's the actual breakdown with Disney having 37% market share to this point, even figuring to the end of these runs for Indiana Jones and Little Mermaid and Elemental? Well, if we assume, as we said, the total Walt Disney theatrical rental income year to date in 2023 from those movies that we just mentioned, $1.18 billion. And then $1.88 billion in an estimated total production and marketing expenses for those same films. Well, boom, that's a $700 million estimated loss on all of the films thus far released by the Walt Disney Company, year-to-date 2023. And that is giving Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny a $400 million final box office run. Now, of course, whether Indiana Jones actually reaches that point is up for debate. And as of today, Saturday, July 8th, it seems increasingly unlikely, as Insidious: The Red Door is looking to absolutely trounce it this weekend by about $5 to $6 million. And then we've got other things like The Sound of Freedom coming out of nowhere. And of course, in about 4 days, the big one hits with Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. So yes, places like Variety and Deadline magazine can jump up and down about Disney's market share, but as we just showed you in raw numbers, it doesn't really matter when it's costing you $700 million in losses to achieve this market share. That's a down payment on Hulu, folks. The problem, of course, is that how does Disney make up this $700 million loss at the box office? Back in days past, and I mean for decades and decades on in the theatrical industry and the Hollywood studio industry, those would be made up by licensing the content out that was in theaters to third parties, doing things like rentals and sales on physical media, in more recent years, streaming. Of course, Disney has all but eliminated every one of those tranches almost completely. For the last 2 years, Disney Plus, which is still $13 billion in the hole, not expected to actually turn a profit until sometime in 2024, has been consuming everything within about 45 days of a movie releasing in the theater. PVOD sales and physical media sales have been virtually non-existent for Disney films, and Disney Plus is not actually generating any positive revenue for the company. It's nothing more than a $13 billion credit card to pay for failures. But it seems recently that perhaps Disney has reassessed this situation and has decided to turn a corner. Just a few days ago, Disney officially announced that The Little Mermaid remake starring Halle Bailey would be available on PVOD only July 25th, just a couple of weeks from now. That means you'll be able to go out and buy or rent The Little Mermaid on places like iTunes and Amazon Prime for a fee. But the physical media won't be available until September 19th. There's also no word yet officially from Disney on when The Little Mermaid will drop on Disney Plus. This is proper windowing. You're creating a demand for a movie that is going to sell or should sell fairly well in premium video on demand. if you give it its proper space. If they were to drop it on Disney Plus the exact same time, then people would not spend the $20 or $25 to buy the film, but they might if it's not going to show up on Disney Plus for another 3 to 6 months. And then Disney will have another round of physical media sales when that comes out September 19th, provided, of course, once again, that they do not drop it on Disney Plus until well after that date, maybe October, or maybe they sit on this movie all the way to November, like a Thanksgiving release, as they have done with previous Disney films. That's what Disney should be doing if they want to try to maximize the amount of revenue they can generate to cover these massive production budget overruns and these losses that they continue to suffer in the theaters. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And do join us on Sunday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time right here on Valiant Renegade for the live show, each and every Sunday, as a matter of fact. Hit that like and subscribe, and until next time, take care.